Okay. Looks like it's about to connect. And we're going to wait one more minute. So, Jill, I know you're in New York. Linda, I know you're in California. Sheila, you could be anywhere. But I think you're in California now still. Shirley, Sharon, Tom, Joe, okay. Let me know where you are. Looks like it's about to connect. Okay. Good. Sheila's still in Washington State. Very nice. All right. So welcome everyone to tonight's class. And I titled this class Lifestyle Interventions for Anxiety. And as you've known, if you've been a part of this series of classes, or however you want to call them, seminars, webinars, whatever you want to call them, when I come up with an idea, oftentimes when I go through it and put something together, it ends up in a completely different area. Now, when I talk about anxiety, I'm not talking about medical diagnoses of anxiety, like generalized anxiety disorder or certain things like obsessive compulsive disorder that can fall under under the category of anxiety disorders. None of those medical diagnoses. I'm not talking about any of those. I'm talking tonight a little bit about the notion that all of us are living in a state of anxiety due to various different things. And I'd like to discuss some of the things that I've learned from some of the teachers that I've been really blessed and privileged to have learned from over the years, as well as go through a little bit of mental imagery, something that we covered in episode 66, to help with some of these feelings of anxiety. Now, we all know that anxiety in general has been heightened over the pandemic. Everyone seems to be, if you watch the news or read the news, they're in a state of anxiety. The anxiety could be related to the pandemic, it could be related to the effects of the pandemic, it could be related to the fear of getting a disease, the fear of business. But ultimately, when it comes to anxiety, it's almost always something that is related to something in the future. And when we are able to realize that, then that's going to help a little bit with our anxiety. And we're going to go through that. So again, I'm not talking about the 18% of the population that suffers from a medically diagnosed anxiety disorder, like social anxiety disorder, certain phobias, certain panic disorders. I'm not talking about any of those. We will touch on some of the studies in regards to lifestyle treatments of those, because those lifestyle treatments give us an understanding of how lifestyle can impact our own lives and our own anxiety. So because it sounds like such a serious topic, I wanted to start, I've sort of just decided to start with talking about this little booklet that was written by a doctor by the name of Dr. Robert Rhondell Gibson. And the title of it is How to Be Sick and Miserable Anytime. And it's written sort of tongue in cheek. And I'm going to read through it because I think it's sort of a lighthearted way of introducing a topic that's somewhat serious, I guess, anxiety. And it's also a little bit funny. So the first one, in How to Be Sick or Miserable at Any Time, is to continually read articles about diseases. Any disease will do. Basically, you can continue to read them until you find some symptom that is on you. I mean, we all have various aches or pains. If you read enough, eventually you're going to find some symptoms. That's going to create a whole bunch of anxiety. and is guaranteed to make you sick and miserable anytime. The next is to go over yourself, inspecting every little inch and crevice of your body from head to toe every single day, for sure. Eventually, you'll find something that is just slightly abnormal, and you can think about that and go crazy over it. And that is another way to be sick and miserable at any time. Next is to find fault with everyone and everything. And the key to making sure that you get sick and miserable from this is to make sure you find hidden motives in everything that everybody is doing. If you see somebody on, who's given $20 million to some charity, certainly you can think about it and find some sort of thing that is, some kind of hidden motive. The next way to be sick and miserable anytime is to rush. Don't sit down and eat, task, stand up, guzzle it down with some coffee. But the key to make sure that you're sick and miserable all the time is to consistently rush. If you're on the road and someone gets in the way, definitely lose your temper and make sure they get the finger, because that is ultimately a way to make sure they get out of the way. And then you can continue rushing to the place you go so that you can become more anxious, more sick, and more miserable. The next is don't be interested in anything. There's that expression that all a person gets out of life is a little to eat, a place to sleep, pay taxes, and die. So you can focus on, getting a little to eat, a place to sleep, pay taxes. Always ask what's in it for you, because this is a perfect way for you to not to be interested in anything. Because ultimately, if you are focused on every single thing in terms of how it is in it, what's in it for me, ultimately, this is the perfect way for you to get into a position where everything is boredom, you don't have any friends. This is perfect way to be sick and miserable all the time. Next is to be angry. Now, if you are angry, this is certainly going to wreck your health. It's going to wreck your business. It's going to wreck your social life. But the good news is it'll keep your mind busy. You'll be rehashing what that evil person did to you all the time, over and over again. What you would say to that person over and over again. This is a perfect way to keep the mind busy, and it's a perfect way to keep yourself miserable and sick all the time. The next way to keep yourself sick and miserable all the time is to have self-pity. Make sure your mouth droops, make sure your shoulders drop, make sure you feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, and mull over all the times that you've had a bad life, that you've been mistreated. And this is an excellent way. It's like a very efficient way to be able to get yourself in a position of being absolutely sick and miserable. The next is to see only bad in the world. And the way to do this is to make sure that you watch the news all the time. I mean, if you keep reading the most sensational news, you are guaranteed to think that everything in the world is terrible. Make sure that you go to YouTube and watch all the disaster videos. This is a great way to get stressed and to get sick, just a really fabulous way. And then the next is to declare yourself old and decrepit, because once you realize in your mind somehow that you are suddenly old and incapable of doing things, this is a great way to create stress, because this allows you to let yourself fall apart. It allows you to stop taking care of yourself and stop exercising. Let yourself fall apart, because age, as you know, is only a state of mind. And therefore, if you are in a position where you can declare yourself old and decrepit, that is a perfect way to be sick and miserable. And these are the 10 ways elucidated by Dr. Robert Rhondell Gibson to make sure you are continually sick and miserable anytime. Now, I wanted to start that way only because, as I said, I think it's funny. I think there's a lot of truth in that. And one of the things that I was thinking about as I was putting this talk together is that my goal, as I always say, is for you to become your own authority in health. And what that really means is not to give you a sense of anxiety, certainly, that somehow everything that you think was good for you is bad for you. I certainly hope that you haven't felt that way, but ultimately that I give you the knowledge that allows you to realize that you can make significant changes, you can make significant choices, and then you can just sit back and, and therefore not get anxious over certain things. So let's talk a little bit about thinking about what stress and anxiety does in a different situation. This is also related to two people, Dr. Gibson, who I spoke about, and then another teacher of mine by the name of Dr. Gerald Epstein. And they described and went into great detail talking about what's called the false emergency state. Now, the false emergency state is basically just what it says, a false emergency. And almost every emergency in our life is a false emergency. The only way something is a true emergency is if our lives are about to be taken from us. That's really the ultimate emergency. But if our body is reacting as if it's an emergency when it actually isn't, what happens is that your body mobilizes itself to be able to respond to this stress that you have taken upon yourself. And ultimately, you have taken this on by making the false conclusion that what is happening in front of you is an emergency. This could be somebody cutting you off in traffic. And all of a sudden, your body reacts as if it's an emergency. And what does it do? It mobilizes hormones, it mobilizes energy. And instead of that energy being worked off by running away from a predator or fighting off a true emergency, it resides in the body. This mobilized hormonal energy. All the glands get expressed, adrenaline, et cetera, a whole bunch of other things get expressed. Blood gets shifted to areas where you might need to use them. There's a whole host of things that go on inside the body when your mind makes the conclusion, false or not, that there is an emergency. And if that is made, that your mind has made that decision, all this energy has really nowhere to go. And therefore, when you're in a state of this false emergency, or you're worrying about something in the future and it's developing a state of anxiety, it's like your body is holding on to this energy. And what happens with time over and over, when this continually happens without it being expressed, then the cells in the body are going to start to not behave the way they are supposed to. And this can lead ultimately to a state of disease. Could be any kind of disease. And ultimately, we have to understand that we are always making this decision. Almost every day we make this decision that we are making that the situation in front of us is an emergency state. So my teacher would say at all times, you should always ask yourself, is this a true emergency or not? Another thing to ask yourself is right now, are you in a good, right now, are you safe? And the reason that question is important is because a lot of the anxiety, just general anxiety that we almost always have on a daily basis, is related to something in the future. There might be some time deadline, or there might be some worry that something may happen or something might happen, or I should do this, or I could do this. If, all these if, ands, buts, woulds, coulds, all of these things that propel ourselves into the future, all of these are going to have a negative impact on our health because they take us away from what is actually happening, what is actually real, what is happening now. And right now, here we are, regardless of what you have to do tomorrow, or regardless of what worries you had before you came on to tonight's class, regardless of, the deadline next week, right now, here we are, ultimately very blessed to be able to log on to modern technology to, here I am in Miami Beach, and Sharon's in Texas, and Sheila's in Washington, and Jill's in New York, and here we are sitting, relaxing. Hopefully I'm not causing a false emergency state. And here we are able in this moment to be able to not have any anxiety, um, regardless of what we may have been thinking about before. And for people who, saintly people throughout the ages have been able to live in this state all the time. That's what partly makes this notion of, enlightenment, or whatever the case, however any tradition defines it, these people who have been able to remain in this moment and not project themselves into the future. Because when we project ourselves into the future, that often causes a situation of anxiety. So we have to acknowledge, one, is there an emergency state happening? Two, is there some sort of, are we worried about something happening in the future? And if so, we have to understand that the future is only a probability. It isn't something that is definite. And therefore, we really can't predict what's going to happen. And ultimately, we wouldn't want to predict. I mean, can you imagine how miserable a life would be if every day you knew what was going to happen throughout the entire day and the next day? We don't want that. But at the same time, we have this contradictory feeling that we have to have safety and security. And we don't have any safety or security. And that is an illusion that we have to become comfortable with. And ultimately, that can be a difficult thing that we'll talk about a little bit more probably as we get through tonight's class. So the ultimate recommendation that say Dr. Robert Rhondell Gibson used to say is, don't make anything too important, but keep your mood up. And that is really the ultimate way, I think, to remind yourself to not make anything too important. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, because it sounds like you aren't taking life seriously by not making something important. But we're going to talk a little bit more about what really that means. So let's speak a little bit about the role of the media. The media basically gives you this opinion that there are diseases. Of course, now we're dealing with situations like COVID, where there is this disease that's just waiting around to attack you. And my goal, as I said, is for you to become your own authority in health. But ultimately, it's for you to realize that you can optimize things for yourself in a way that maximizes your health and ultimately allows you to realize that you've done what you can do, and that you can have a feeling of comfort in the moment that is going to allow you to be able to think clearly, to be relaxed, and to be able to make proactive decisions for yourself. Because we have to understand that the feeling, we've spoken about this before, but ultimately that there are 4 general principles to your overall health. There's, of course, nutrition. There's movement mechanics. In other words, exercise, or how you're sitting, posture, all that sort of thing. Then there's environmental influences, so things around in your environment, whether it's the light that could potentially be causing problems. And then the 4th is your inner state, your mental state, your inner feeling. And your inner feeling is just as important as fitness, as nutrition, as environmental influences. And for a great many number of people, your inner feeling, the feeling that you have internally, is going to have a much greater impact than almost anything that is, it could be your primary factor when it comes to your overall health. I can't tell you how many times I've had patients who their nutrition is great, their exercise is great. They only have environmentally, all the cleaning supplies are in their house are, environmentally friendly and all natural. And yet they're dealing with a great many number of health problems because they're in a constant state of either anxiety or anger, all those things that we spoke about in the sort of joking kind of things in How to Become Sick and Miserable by Dr. Gibson, where it talks about how just anger, there are people who are just walking around seething with anger. There are people who walk around with a great deal of self-pity, where they just feel like the world is out to get them. And all of these negative types of emotions that can create an enormous amount of internal stress in the body. We're talking about ultimately one leading potentially to that false state of emergency, but also to feelings of depression and decrease in energy that then leads to a spiral. And so we have to there are many people, there are thousands of podcasts out there talking about how to get your nutrition right, how to hack your body, how to optimize your home environment for health. And yet, for some people, it's the inner feeling, their mental state, that is ultimately going to yield the most improvement in their health. We've spoken about this before, this idea of the Pareto principle, where 20% of the inputs yields 80% of the outputs. And if you look at that from the perspective of these four things, nutrition, mental state, environmental influences, and movement, for some people, that inner feeling, that mental state, is going to have an oversized and potentially the majority impact on their overall health. And there is no real discussion about optimizing your health without taking into account this inner state, this mental state, this inner feeling. Many of us have a conception of a mental image of ourself that is not consistent with where we want to go with our overall health. In our body mastery method, which is a course that I have that helps people to optimize their health through a 12-week program, we spend a lot of time on what I call this inner game, inner state, your mental state, and how your internal conception of who you are and what you want to be. We birth essentially what we visualize. And if what we visualize, consciously or not, is something that's not consistent with our overall health, then it's not going to be, we're not going to be able to manifest that. As an example, when I have people who are trying to lose a certain amount of weight, there is some mental imagery exercises, and they can be very difficult. They can be very difficult for people to imagine what they want to achieve. Because we have idea about ourselves. It's so ingrained that it can take a lot of time to move and shift that. But ultimately, if we're working on this and understanding how these images, our self-conception, our self-image, how that's impacting our overall health, then ultimately it's going to allow us to be able to make changes that we want. So that means that ultimately we have to deal with this idea of uncertainty. Anxiety is almost always about having this feeling of uncertainty, especially about the future, worry and anxiety. And when we can start to live with the feeling, one, that we focus in on the present, where it seems as though things are going very well right now. As I said, as an example, here we are. Hopefully you're enjoying tonight's talk and it's causing you to think. And at the very moment, there's nothing wrong in the world as we're talking, as we're interacting. And when we can focus on this moment, as my teacher, Dr. Gerald Epstein used to say, being present in the presence of the present, being aware of what's going on now and not focusing on things that are in the future. Of course, that doesn't mean we don't prepare for the future, make educated decisions, but that we live now and not in the future. And again, we're talking in a situation, not for people who have diagnosed anxiety issues, but the daily day-to-day life that we have. There are some definitions that I'd like to go through that are, or associations, I should say. So anxiety ultimately is really a dissipation of energy. When you have anxiety, what happens is you can start out with, you can have the perfect sleep, okay? And you had the best workout in the world, right? and you had a great breakfast, and you are feeling like you are ready to tackle the day. And then all of a sudden, an email comes across your email, and something horrible happened with your business, or you're going to have to leave work early and you're not going to get work done, or whatever the case may be. And then all of a sudden, all of this energy that you had starts to dissipate. That's what anxiety does to you. It binds and dissipates energy. The energy that you could be using for something else is now being bound up, worrying about something in the future. So, as we spoke about before, the tool to use yourself. One, is this a true emergency? Right now, in this moment, is something really going to happen to me that is going to be life-threatening? The answer, again, 99% of the time is no. Two, am I worried about something that may or may not happen in the future? Because anything in the future is just a probability, which means ultimately that you don't know it's going to happen. And therefore, you really need to just realize there is no safety and security in this life, and realize that in this moment, things are pretty darn good. Contrast that with the feeling that you get when you are involved in something creative and you have this creative action. With creative action, ultimately, you have an accumulation of energy. So one can think about these things as two sides of a coin. Anxiety, a coin of energy, where you have one side, which is a dissipation of energy, that is anxiety, worry about something in a probabilistic thing, potentially, possibly, maybe happening in the future, one that you probably have already drawn false conclusions to because of this state of anxiety. And then contrast that with going and doing. My teacher, again, I'm repeating quite a bit on tonight's class, Dr. Gerald Epstein used to hand out these cards to people. It just said go, comma, do. And therefore, don't worry about things, just go and do. And it's ultimately something that we can use as a tool. He felt that it would be a great tool to just remind yourself when you have anxiety, when the energy is bound and is dissipating, to just go and do. Go and do. Let's talk about the idea that one depends on something. And one way to think about that is to trust in what is needed. And I'm reading this from Dr. Gibson, since there's nothing one can depend on except change, whatever one depends on can be lost, thus creating anxiety. And contrast that with what is useful, which is free to do without, but of value for use in this moment. And so when we are focused too much on being dependent on something versus finding things around us that are useful, that are of value right now in the moment. And I find that to be, a really interesting way of looking at that. Ultimately, it's this distinction between something that's interesting and something that is important. Remember, we spoke about how Gibson would say something to the effect of, don't make anything too important and keep your mood up, as sort of the ultimate life hack, the ultimate life guidance. And he didn't want you to not be interested in things. He wanted you to cultivate an interest. And at the end of the class, which, these classes go by very fast. We probably won't do a full hour tonight. But ultimately, it's really about understanding that when we make something too important, it is a situation where we become dependent on that. Whereas the opposite is to find something of unique importance, because when we drop unique interest to us, so when we drop this over feeling of this is so important, it has to be done, we can then switch over to finding what is useful and what is interesting. And what is interesting is things that are going to make you feel more energy, more enthusiasm. So the word for enthusiasm, actually, I think it means in Greek something like fire of the gods, something of that sort. And ultimately, when we let go of being too tied to the feeling of this is important, this is, that sort of thing, and we allow ourselves to become interested, usually when things become interesting, then we develop this sense of enthusiasm. And in this sense of interest and enthusiasm is really the beauty of, I believe, of life. And it's ultimately where we start to understand for ourselves what uniquely makes us, what's uniquely unique about us. The things that we find interesting are always going to be unique to us. Some people like a certain type of coffees. Some people like a certain type of cake, or whatever the case may be. We all have these unique interests. And it's through these interests, cultivating creative action, as well as this feeling of this interest that leads to enthusiasm, which leads to generating energy. This is the art of life, and it's the art of almost really thinking about it, a way of understanding your uniqueness, your authenticity, because when we are able to cultivate and involve our lives in such a way where we are continually finding things that are of interest to us, that leads to enthusiasm, leads to more energy, which is going to lead to more health and a more fulfilling life. And Dr. Gibson used to say that God didn't create you because you're important, because ultimately one person, look, there are 5 billion people, so he didn't create you because you're important, but he did create you because you are interesting. That's why you're here. And it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from a rabbi named Schneerson, but he basically said that, I don't know why this just popped into my head, but not exactly related, but it's one of my favorite quotes. But he said that of course now I'm going to forget it, but it was about your birthday, and the quote was, I can't remember the quote, unfortunately. Okay, yeah, I remember. It was, your birthday is a day God decided the world couldn't live without you. It's sort of a nice quote that I like. So anyway, if you don't make it important, but if you don't make something too important, it can still be interesting. And then when you realize that, you get to a point where you don't make things too important, you start looking for things more that are interesting. And everyone has their own interests, and therefore it's a way of cultivating, again, your own authenticity and learning about what you like and what you don't like. And when you go down this path, about when you make things too important, that is anxiety inducing. You're holding it up, you're almost elevating it to the level of an idol. You're making it so important. But maybe things can just be interesting. And when they become interesting, as I said, gets to a point where that can lead to enthusiasm and generates a whole bunch of energy. Okay, now as I said, I started this by talking about anxiety and how we're not really talking about generalized anxiety disorders. However, there have been various studies that I'd like to just briefly go over that talk about certain things that, as far as lifestyle goes, that are going to impact your overall level of it even helps people who have anxiety disorders. So first, let's talk a little bit about the diet. Obviously, processed foods are associated with increased anxiety. That we know about. For some people, coffee can be an issue. So we do need to be careful with caffeine. Not for everyone, but excess caffeine can also yield that. Phytochemicals, phytonutrients, plant chemicals are good for your microbiome. One of the things that I've been recommending to my Body Mastery Method members is that they add some obviously fruits and vegetables, but in addition, in their smoothie in the morning, I recommend that they add some powders that are made from certain fruits. Like, for example, pomegranate powder. It allows you to get a lot of the pomegranate, the phytochemicals concentrated. And a lot of people focus on phytochemicals as being some wondrous thing that is supposed to be like an antioxidant. The most amazing thing they do, quite frankly, is not their role as an antioxidant. It's their role as something that feeds the healthy microbiome. So in my smoothie, I actually have this flour made from the grapes of that were gotten rid of with wine. So you're getting like all the amazing benefits of the wine. They call it wine flour. Doesn't have any alcohol. It's just the grapes, and then pomegranate powder, as well as some other things. It's a way of upping your intake of these things in such a way that they're going to feed your microbiome. And why is your microbiome important here? Because your microbiome creates an enormous number of neurotransmitters like serotonin, these things that make you, that improve your mood and can help with things like anxiety. People who have celiac disease have been shown to have some anxiety that goes away with going on a diet. The other things that I could say, obviously, exercise. All the things I'm mentioning now have been studied to help with. You need to be on an exercise program. You need to be moving. You need to have that in such a way that you're doing that. And we've spoken about what exercise encompasses. It encompasses some resistance work. It encompasses getting your heart rate up a little bit, where you're a little bit out of breath for just a short period of time. Of course, you have to talk to your doctor and see whether you're doing that. And then long walks. Those three things, and maybe a fourth you could say, is flexibility. But if you get those three things where you're walking a lot, maybe you have a couple days a week where you just do even 5 or 10 minutes of a little bit of more intensity, and then some resistance work. You have to build your muscles. You have to keep your muscles. I guess that's really the best way to think about it. As you're getting older, you must work on maintaining your muscle mass. It's a battle, and all of us should be in training and thinking of ourselves in training. Some sort of relaxation, some kind of outdoor activity. All of these things have been shown to improve anxiety, and I wouldn't discount them for just the run-of-the-mill, day-to-day anxiety that I've been speaking about tonight in tonight's class. Ultimately, your body needs the resilience to deal with the feelings of anxiety that we get. I spent a half hour giving you various little tips and tools that have been imparted to me by the teachers I've been very lucky to have encountered in my life. But ultimately, your body needs the resilience. Many of you have probably had the experience of going away on vacation, coming home, and it just seems like the stress that you had that bothered you before your vacation, after your vacation, when you're back, you feel like, I can deal with it a little bit better. And then a week goes by and you're back where you were before. How do we cultivate the physical resilience to be able to respond to the anxiety that we experience on a day-to-day basis? We do that partially through the tools that I spoke about before, but also dealing with making sure your sleep is optimized, having 10 to 20 minutes of relaxation per day, whether that's taking a long bath, whatever. We've spoken about that before. Having some sort of outdoor activities, whether that's walking on the beach, walking through the woods, just putting your feet into the grass in your backyard and taking some deep breaths, whatever the case may be. But think of it as building a resilience, building a buffer that you need to be able to respond to what truly is a toxic social environment that we're living in right now. And if you think you can get through that with just doing the same things you've been doing, then I would just caution you that you need to really up your game. Not trying to create any anxiety, but we're in a situation now, so socially in this country, that we need to be able to build some extra resilience. And I'm hoping that some of the things I'm recommending tonight will help you with that. Let's talk a little bit about nutrients that have been shown to help with this. L-theanine. L-theanine is found in green tea, also found in black tea. It's found in very high levels of matcha tea. which is the powdered green tea that they whisk and drink. And it's one of the reasons why, even though matcha has an enormous amount of has a decent amount of caffeine, enough, similar to a cup of coffee, it also has L-theanine, which can induce a sense of calmness. And so a lot of the reason why monks liked matcha tea is because even though it heightened the alertness, it also cultivated a sense of calm. And so L-theanine is available as a supplement, but I recommend you just get it from there are several green teas like matcha. There's one called Gyokura tea that is also reasonably high caffeine, but also has a high level of L-theanine. Lemon balm has been known forever to help. Saffron is also something that can be helpful for anxiety. So incorporating a little saffron into your diet. And then also the omega index. We've spoken about the omega index. This gives you a percent of your ratio between omega-3 and omega-6. And these are blood tests that are available. You can order them on your own, and you can actually do a finger stick at home and send it in. And if your omega index, if you don't have enough omega-3 in your red blood cells, or in your body, I should say, if you have a state of anxiety, your anxiety and your depression, if you have issues with that, generally improves with omega-3 supplements if your omega-3 index is low. I always recommend not to just start, you should always, as I've said over and over again, you should always have a reason for taking the supplements that you take. So I wouldn't just go out and buy an omega-3 supplement. What I would recommend, though, is for you to get an omega index. And if you're dealing with anxiety or depression, of course, talk to your doctor about that. But check your omega index. And if it is low, then for a lot of people with low omega index, too much omega-6, not enough omega-3, correcting that can improve things. And then lavender, you can put lavender in your bath. Lots of ways of using lavender aromatherapy can help with anxiety as well. All right, we're coming to the end of the class, and I just wanted to read something, if I can find it. One moment. So I'd like to do a little imagery exercise, and then if someone wants to share, that's great. I think all of you were on my. I'm not sure if all of you were on my class of mental imagery, but we sit with our back straight, our hands on our laps or on the side of the chair, and then we close your eyes and we breathe out 3 times slowly. Breathe out 3 times slowly. One more time. Normal in-breath. Slow out breath. And I want you to see yourself in the room of anxiety. Breathe out once and find a door to your right. Enter through it to another. Find there another door to the right. Enter through it and continue doing the same room after room until you find your room of silence. Stay there for a long moment, looking around at your room of silence, knowing that the anxiety is gone. Then breathe out once and open your eyes. We did a similar exercise in episode 66, but this one is one that I've used many times for people with anxiety. If someone wants to share what their room looked like or how they felt, please do type it into the box. If not, I'm going to read something that I came across tonight from Dr. Gerald Epstein about anxiety. and then we'll call it a night. Here's what he wrote. Anxiety is a necessary disruption of our equilibrium. A situation occurs that impels us to relinquish our established notions of safety and insulation. In this upheaval, we can either collapse or we can listen to the message. Anxiety's maelstrom provides the needed signal. The throes of destruction awaken us to the promise of a new life. As we forfeit our illusions of safety and security, we die, and only in death do we live eternally. We watch the death of our habits, our errors, and our beliefs. In this, we discover the glimmer of some essential truth about ourselves. We then return to life in an entirely different way. This perspective of a seemingly disastrous event that leads us to ultimately defeat death underlies the Western tradition. In its first emphatic attack, anxiety can disrupt us so severely that we forget its benefits. Its cataclysmic effects can distort our judgment and adversely shadow our attention, as the anxiety seems to trap us within its winding tentacles and to stifle our breath. We can then use these imagery exercises to regain our understanding. So using imagery can help you with these feelings of anxiety. The room that you create in your imagination is one that can be used to help with your anxiety. But ultimately, what I liked about this quote is ultimately one that we have to understand, and we almost have to remind ourselves on a regular basis that there is no, it's an illusion of safety and security that we have, but that shouldn't cause anxiety. Instead, it should give us, it should open up possibilities for us to become more authentic in ourselves, to find out, as we spoke about before, what is interesting to us, what creates enthusiasm, so that we cultivate a deeper sense of authenticity in such a way that it brings more life to our lives. That enthusiasm that we spoke about can only come when we let go of things that we find too important, that we've made false conclusions or false senses, false emergency states. We let that go, and things that interest us come up, and that develops enthusiasm, which leads to more life and more vital energy to improve our life and to improve our health and to maximize the possibilities that we have in our life, as opposed to things that can distort our judgment, that prevent us from seeing things clearly. When we let go of the illusions that we have, this is something that can help us. So I think I've covered. I think I've exhausted everything that I wanted to talk to tonight. And obviously, this is one of those classes that started as one thing, which was lifestyle interventions for anxiety, and then morphed into a reflection of some of the teachers that I've had over the years. So I hope it was valuable to you. Thank you for the comments I see coming in. And I'll see you, wish everyone well, and I'll see you next Wednesday at 8 p.m. And as I said, I wish everyone good health and a good night. Have a great night. Bye-bye.